And we are live. Hey, Amber, how are you?
Good. How are you, Warren?
I'm really good, thanks. It's a Thursday. I can't even
It,
get my
it feels
days
like a
straight.
Tuesday, doesn't it? It
It's
does feel like
yeah, it's been a day, and I actually like doing these lives during the day because it kind of breaks up the momentum a little bit for me, and it kind of
totally.
refocuses me. So,
Mhm.
and I appreciate you being here. This is great.
Yeah, I'm the same. I also like to do my lives during the day because I am a full-time mama and she's at school right now. So it's always nice to be able to go to work when she's at school.
Yep, perfect.
Yeah.
So we are talking healthy relationship, healthy communication in a relationship. And
Mhm.
I just want to preface before we get further in, you and I had a conversation on Tuesday.
Mhm.
And in that conversation, this has like resonated with me for like 2 days now. We were talking about get how we're doing this now. We're part of NATV and everything that's going on. And we had talked about the fact that for so many years, I was really bad at communication. And now I'm trying to get much better at communication. And I kind of made a mistake, right? When I was talking to my partner about it and said, I need you to understand what I'm doing, right? And the look on your face was like, no, you couldn't have done that worse, right? And
Well,
and
and
it's
and like I want to stop you really quick because you didn't say I need you to. You said you have to.
you have to. You're right.
Those are the words. I
Yes.
wrote them down. Have to. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we make in relationships is and I've been thinking about like how I want to talk about this today, but a big part of relationships, we are all in this mindset and this perception of I need my needs. I need
Right.
to fulfill my own needs. And so when we think my need to be fulfilled, we tell our partner, you have to because it fulfills my needs. Um, and so, yeah, I remember I was telling you, and you hadn't told me yet that she had resistance to what you said. I said she probably didn't like that. And she didn't because you told her she had to. And the bottom line is for me, teaching people in general, and just for myself, even I explain to people all the time, when you say that I have to do something, my brain already knows I don't have to do anything.
Right.
And it's really I think it's trigger oriented, but it also kind of prepares somebody for battle because they
Right.
already feel like they don't want to because they're being told they have to do something. And I think that goes back to childhood, when our parents tell us we have to do the chores, we have to take out the trash, we have to finish our dinner, we have to do our homework, we have to make our bed. Like there's so many things that we've grown up to believe that we have to do
Yep.
that those words are so just exhausting to us. And I love that Tuesday you were really open to me stopping you and offering my triggers because I do trigger people when I call them out to let them know that what they've done is probably not the best route. But that, a really great way to tell your partner, because you were talking about how this podcast is something you're really passionate about. This is something you really want to achieve and be great at. So, when you have something that you're passionate about and you have a partnership, I think that the best way you can go about asking for support is just that asking for support, saying, there's this thing that I really want to do. And it's going to require a lot of my attention. It's going to require that I pour a lot of myself into it. And I really want your support. I really would like to have you support me. So here's how I feel you could support me best. What do you think? And that's when it becomes a partnership and no longer a one sided conversation. Partnership is a teamwork.
And it's so interesting that you put it that way because right after I said to her, I need you to, I kind of laid out everything that was going to happen. Right.
Hmm.
And the expectations of my time and my expectations of our time together. And
Hmm.
so when I'm downstairs until 11 o'clock at night and she's upstairs watching TV, when I come upstairs, it's not like, oh man, you left me alone for 4 hours.
Right.
I know where you were. I know what you were doing and I'm
Right.
okay with it. And so that kind of reinforcement that she's telling me I'm okay with it because I know what it means to you.
Hmm.
I mean, that's what it's all about. So it's even though I really messed up in saying I need you to, I think
You
having
have
that
to.
follow
Yeah.
I have to.
Yeah.
I think that follow-up conversation kind of clear the path, right?
It
Because
does, right?
yeah, because and that's where the communication is, because I'll be honest, previously I would have just said, I'm just doing it, and there was no
No
conversation about it, right?
communication, right?
And that's the worst possible thing you can do, is just leave it dead-ended like that. But when you're willing to have those conversations after and listen to the other person, that's when it becomes really important.
Absolutely. I have a question. Do you have siblings?
I do have an older sister.
An older sister. So you're the youngest. So all the attention's kind of already on the oldest sibling. So I think that really does go back to childhood. Again, you were probably really independent and kind of just did things whenever, because everybody else was focused on your older sister and like really putting that attention towards them, that they didn't really worry about you too much. And, you know, um, there was a big stigma too about like boys will be boys, right? And
Right.
girls have this like higher expectation of how to show up. So it's easier for you even at that point to just kind of do whatever, that you probably didn't really have to communicate too much to your parents.
Oh,
But
no, I didn't, and, way back then, there were no cell phones, right? And there was
right,
no texting, and I just kinda did my own thing, and nobody really kept tabs, and, I knew when I needed to be home, but there was not a whole lot of communication. To your point, they just kinda let me do my thing, and
yeah,
sometimes that was really empowering, and other times it really got me in trouble, so it is different, but you're spot on, because as I got into my marriage, I just kinda did my thing, right? I did
right.
what I thought was best for
Hmm.
everyone in the family.
And if you
And
think
and
about your parents too, like what kind of communication did your parents share as a kid? What do
you
you
know, it
remember?
it no, I do remember, and it's kind of molded me, and not necessarily in a good way, because they were they said what they needed to say when they needed to say it, and that was
Hmm.
kind of it, right? It wasn't this very open communication. It was a bad thing. It was just the nature. I mean, just who they were, right? They said what they needed to say, and it was a great. I mean, I had an amazing childhood. I still have a
Hmm.
great relationship with my mom's going to be 90 next month, and
Hmm.
we're every day we constantly communicate. But I think it set the groundwork for how I am. And my kids will tell me all the time, "Dad, you're not a great communicator." I'm like, you know what?
You know, if your kids are telling you, you're in trouble.
Yeah, but I think it goes back to the conversation we had on Tuesday, where I was kind of pre-programmed to, and maybe intentionally, not rock the boat, right?
Right,
I'm that, if you do one of those personality things, I'm a people pleaser, right? And so when you're a
mhm,
pleaser, you don't wanna rock the boat, you don't want people to be upset, and so you
right,
just kinda hold things back, and you don't share that, you're having a health issue, or you're having financial issues, or you don't share that with other people, you keep it inside because you don't wanna
right,
rock things, and then
right.
when things get bad, it's like, "Well, why didn't you tell me?"
Well,
So
and
I'm
it's hard too, like coming from a childhood where, you talk about things when you need to, there's not a lot of conflict. So you're not really prepared how to handle conflict because it was simpler times back then. It was easier to just do things the way that you guys did them. And now we live in a culture and society where there's conflict every week. There's something going on every single week. So we've all had to adjust and change the way that we communicate over the years because of technology, because of, social media, because of the demand for our jobs. Like everything has really shifted over the years. So you're not alone in that, in the aspect of like not knowing how to communicate in conflict. One thing that we talked about also was the people pleasing. You talked about people pleasing. And I had already written down, a big part of communication in relationships is being able to say no and
Mhm.
feeling confident behind your no and feeling supported and safe to say no to your partner. That's a really hard thing to do these days in society and in our culture because we have expectations. And so when it comes to healthy communication, I think people don't know that expectations is what is leading them to their disappointment. Because when we have an expectation, like how you did with your partner, when you say, I need you to show up this way, that's your expectation, right?
Right.
But if that person can't show up that way, we're automatically disappointed because they can't show up for us the way we need them to. And so it's really hard to communicate safely and healthily when we put expectations down from the very beginning. And again, that goes back to our I have needs. I need to fulfill my needs, and I have an expectation that you're supposed to show up and fill my needs.
Right.
And so I think the hardest thing that people need to get through is dropping their expectations. And instead of, laying that expectation down, coming to your partner, coming to your significant other and saying, I have this. What do you think? Asking not necessarily their opinion, but where they're at with it.
Yep.
And also, so I think for a long time I had such a hard time with this in all kinds of different relationships with my family, with friendships. Like I don't like hearing other people's opinions. I like to figure things out for myself. Um, and the kind of support that I need is more on the affirmation level and more on
Yep.
the validation level than it is needing somebody else's opinion on how I should do something. So, one thing I've learned is that the way I ask for their support and the way that I ask them to put their input in matters. Because if I ask them for their opinion and I don't want their opinion, why did I ask them for
Why?
their opinion?
Right.
Right? So I've learned to not ask for an opinion for myself, but rather saying, like, how do you feel about doing this to support me? Like, how do you feel about this part of it that I need your support with? And open to the reality that they may not be okay with that, like. And I've also learned that you can fulfill your needs with different relationships in your life. It doesn't have to be from your partner. It can be from a friend. It can be from a coworker or a confidant or a therapist or whatever you need that support from. It doesn't have to come from your partner. And that is something that was really hard for me to learn as well along the road, for sure.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
We talked. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go.
No, one of the things we definitely talked about people pleasing. We talked about saying no, but we also talked about the joy factor.
Ooh, yeah. Okay, before we get there, we'll get there last. We'll save that
Okay.
for last, right after this. One other thing that you had mentioned, you told me about how you were married for 31 years to your past former, and that you were together for 35 years. So we're talking about people pleasing, and that it took you that long before you got divorced because you were people pleasing your children, in the fact that you didn't want to hurt them by leaving, right? So.
Right.
One thing we were talking about in that was how, it's hard to stay, but it's also hard to leave, no matter what. Like, it's hard both ways. And you had explained to me that your children still had a really hard time with it, even though you waited for such a long time, thinking that it would be easier in the long run if you waited it out. And then it was
Right.
still hard anyways, right?
It
Like,
was brutal, and
mhm.
I really thought that I had it all figured out. And there was a period before I told my ex that I wanted to end the relationship, where I kind of went away for a weekend. I just kind of did my own thing for a weekend, and I kind of got my head together of what I needed to do in my life. And I kind of laid out what those next couple months were going to look like until I talked to her, because I didn't say anything for a couple months, as I kind of had thoughts in my head about work and what all these different things that went into the whole process.
Mhm.
And I will tell you, Amber, never once did I think, I wonder how the boys are going to react to this. Because I
Because you had
really,
already decided, right, that they were going to be
yeah, I
okay.
just kind of assumed that they saw the kind of relationship that we had for so long, that they would have got it and said, "Yeah, Dad, I'm surprised that it took you this long." And it was 180 degrees of that. And
Mhm.
boy, yeah, that was something I never in my life expected it was going to be that hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it still resonates.
So I think, like, a really good lesson in communication, healthy communication like this, is that sometimes things are really hard to talk about. Sometimes things are like so uncomfortable that it makes you shake. It makes you like really sick to your stomach to even bring it up. And those are the conversations that need to be had the most, like, in my opinion. Those are the ones
Yep.
we shouldn't hold on to. We shouldn't hold that in our body. It makes us sick. And we got to get it out as soon as possible. But then what we do is we prepare ourselves for what will happen. And we play this game of the fortune teller, the future teller, the psychic, when we actually have no idea how the other person feels. We don't know what
Right.
they're thinking. We don't
Yep.
know how many people it's going to affect. We have zero idea about it until we just let it out. And I think it's really important for people to understand that if there's a conversation that needs to be had, have it. There's no right or wrong way to have it.
Yep.
I was just watching on the NATV when it was coming out on a notification recently today about how a woman was like waiting to have a conversation with her mom and setting a boundary. And she had waited a long time before she told her mother because she didn't want to upset her mom. She didn't want her mom to feel unloved or unvalued in having to put her boundary down. And she like wanted the perfect environment. She wanted all of these things to unfold. And it still ended up being that her mom was hurt and offended and upset, and it made her feel like she had failed as a daughter to communicate to her mother that she loved her. But the reality is that you can't control how other people react. You can't
Right.
control how your children feel about the decision that is best for you. All you can do is make decisions that are healthy for you, communicate them healthily, right? Like, and
Right.
knowing that, like, it's going to suck for some people to hear what you have to say.
Yep.
It just is. And if you come from the right intentions and with love, hopefully things will smooth out the way that they can. But again, you have no control over how other people are going to react. A lot of people don't know how to communicate healthily. A lot of people react before they respond, right?
So I think that's a really important point. People, I tell people all the time, don't just respond, listen. I think we're in a world where you're just all you want to do is be able to reply. You don't
Right.
process what the other person is saying, and because you haven't processed it and you really haven't thought about it, your response probably isn't even the correct response. You're just thrown out because you're already in your mind thinking about what you want to say without
Mhm.
really processing what the other person's saying, and it always ends badly.
And that's a majority of conversations these days. People are just listening to defend themselves, listening to react, listening to do whatever. And a lot of times people don't even sit and feel their body on how they feel. And that's a
Yep.
really big thing for me. How your body feels is really important. If something is stuck in your body, like your gut, my gut is where I feel everything.
Yeah.
Some people will feel it in their heart. Some people will feel it like in their chest or in their head. But for me, it's in my gut. And if my gut feels tight and full of tension and it's uncomfortable, I got to do something to get it
Gotta do
out. And a
something
lot
about
of
it.
it for me is talking. Like I have to talk it out. But it just depends on the person, right? So, okay, let's see. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so reaction versus responses. A reaction for me is like a quick like response, right? Like it's something that just comes right out. It's like the word vomit, that I'm telling you what I feel or my opinion.
Yep.
Whereas a response is going to be like trying to understand something. So I follow this profile on Instagram. It's called Responsive Parenting. It has changed my life in so many ways, especially as a mom who comes from a traumatic background. Like,
Yep.
I'm not going to get into that. I have a big story, but um, so responding to things is all about asking questions to understand. So whenever you're feeling like there's an uncomfortability going on, you're not really sure where the other person's coming from, or you feel like they're taking you the wrong way, instead of defending yourself and instead of trying to force control how they see you, ask them questions. Try to understand why they're seeing you the way that they're seeing you.
Oh, okay.
I feel like intelligent people often can see how the other person is thinking about them, and it
Yep.
can be so frustrating, right? When you can totally tell how they're seeing you and it's not how you're trying to be presented.
Right.
But you have to get to the bottom of it so you can change their perspective, and the only way you can do that is if you ask them questions and try to get them to like get there themselves, right? Like, so for me, when it comes to conversations with people, if somebody's pointing fingers at you, they're already in the reaction place.
Right.
They're not even in the intelligent space of like trying to understand you. So you can turn that around by asking questions. That's another thing I wanted to like make sure that I get out today. Okay, so the joy factor, we'll just go like we'll just end it here. I wrote down 5 things that I think are important for a healthy relationship. Number 1 is commitment. Commitment is so important in a relationship because if your perception is if this person messes up one time, I'm out,
Right.
it's already doomed. It's
Yep.
already getting out of there. And I was one of those people who would flight. Like I would just run for the hills. I would ghost people. I would not even want to face like I'm a big avoider. But the first commitment I really made in my life was my daughter. And it was one of the most life-changing experiences that I've ever had because like you once you sign up for parenting, like it's not you don't get to quit.
Right.
You're in it, right? So, for better or worse, I'm a mom, and that commitment, I mean, like, to want to be the best mom I can be has motivated me and
Yep.
inspired me in so many ways. So, when it comes to a healthy relationship, you need to know that you're available to be committed to somebody
Right.
for better or
For
worse.
better or worse.
Exactly. And it's not about I think what's hard for people to hear in that is that there are toxic people out there.
Yep.
But are you somebody who is aware of red flags? Are you somebody that's done the work and confident in yourself enough to push those people away that you never even end up in a relationship with somebody who's toxic, right?
Right.
That's so commitment is number 1 for me. Like you have to be committed knowing that you see this person in your future. The second thing that I think is really important for healthy relationships is support. So, if you know you have a safe relationship and you're supported, this person sees who you are, is excited for the future you want to build for yourself, excited to see, you as a parent or as a CEO or as like whatever you're dreaming of for your life, and this person is excited for you and gives you the support you need, then that is the foundation that allows you the security and the safety to bring hard things up.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So if you
Right.
know you're supported, it's not even a problem. Like, hey, I have something really uncomfortable to talk about.
Tell
Can
you.
we sit
Yeah.
down and hold space for that?
Yep.
So easy in a relationship that is founded on support. Number 3 for me is growth. Both of you need to be growing. If you're dating somebody for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, and this person doesn't change anything about themselves, they are stuck in the same loop over and over and over again. They're not going anywhere. They're not growing. And if they're not growing, you're not going to grow.
Right.
You're going to be so busy focusing on trying to help them grow that
That
you're
you're holding
not
yourself.
focused on
Yep.
yourself. Right.
Exactly. Yep.
So that needs to, I think for me, like if you're not in a relationship and you're wanting to find a good, healthy relationship, that should be one of the number 1 questions you ask. How have you grown over the last year? How have you grown over the last 5 years? What have you learned about yourself and how you can make things change in your life? Like you should be asking all of these questions before you get into a relationship with somebody. And if you haven't, ask those questions with your partner. How
I
have you
mean,
grown? What do you see about yourself that you love the most? You know?
it's so important. I can imagine very few times those conversations happen, right? It's just not part of early on anyway. I don't know that it's an early on conversation, right?
Oh, it is for me. I asked my partner so fast. Like
Do
we've
you?
been dating for 2 months. Yes. And for me, I'm gonna probably release something like that, like an intentional dating guide.
Yeah,
Um,
really important.
it
Really
is
important.
like you should know these things about your partner. And if you don't, why are you together?
Right.
You're together over chemistry and probably the other thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what this show is rated. I'm not gonna go there. All right. So the number 4 is communication. So, if you have those other 3 things, your communication's already going to be on fire. It's going to
Yeah.
be awesome.
Yep.
It's going to be easy to talk to them because 1, you're committed. 2, you feel supported and safe. And 3, you're growing together. So if you're growing together, the communication is flawless. It's easy. It feels like this really beautiful dance. That's how it feels because you never have anything to not talk about. And if you're not talking and you're sitting with each other, you just feel good together. Like that's just what builds the number 5, which is the joy factor.
So
And the joy factor for me is love.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm,
It's
I'm
an
just
energy.
curious, Amber, in all of this, where does trust come in?
Trust is number two, and support. It really
Okay.
is, because if you feel supported, it's so easy to feel trust there. And I think number five too, like with love, with the joy factor, like trust is something that is so hard for people to grasp onto. I love that you brought that word up, because that's been something really hard for me most of my life, is trust.
Yep.
And if you don't know, y'all, trust and faith are the same word. They literally are. But faith can be really hard for people who, have triggering traumatic backgrounds with like religion and stuff
Yep.
like that. But trust and faith are the exact same thing. And trust is about being able to breathe and feel relaxed in situations that might be uncomfortable. And I don't think many people walk around life in general feeling trust. It's something that our culture and our society has kind of taken from us, right? Like,
Yeah. I mean, I have a saying, I say it all the time, that there's very few people I like and even fewer people I trust. And it's just
yeah.
how my life has shaped, and it is what it is. And it's hard. That trust piece is really hard for me.
And it comes again from experiences with people who have red flags.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, there's so many people out here who are manipulative and deceptive and trying to control how people think. But you can tell in body language, you can tell in like when facts or like timelines don't
Hmm.
match up,
Don't match
and you
up,
can
right?
always tell in your body when something is off. And I say trust those feelings. Like, I know there's a lot of people who have like the over anxiety and they create those stories that are just not real anymore. And
Right.
that's where I'm like, okay, you got to do the work, you got to go to therapy, you got to do things that really help you build your trust in yourself.
Yep.
But trust starts here first, right? Like, you have to be able to trust yourself and feel confident in your
Right.
decisions and in your relationships and with what you're building in your life. If you don't do those things, how can you trust somebody else?
Right. It all
Right?
starts with you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a big thing for me growing up with parents who did not allow me to trust myself, I was forced to trust them over myself. Like, I get it. It's hard to trust people
Yeah.
because a lot of us have put trust in our caregivers and in our parents who didn't do well by us, didn't know what was best for us because they
Yep.
didn't care. They just
Right.
cared what was best for them. And so there are a lot of things that can be said about trust and about that background. Where does your trust level come
Come
from? Who's
from, right?
deceived
Yeah.
you, right? Like, but when you're building a really confident and healthy relationship, trust just comes naturally, in my opinion. Like, it's, you don't want to be swept off your feet. And that's something for me that is like really touchy, because I've been
Yeah.
swept off my feet so many times, that like this partnership for me, what I was really excited about from the very beginning was that I always felt grounded. I always felt like I was here on the
Here.
ground
Yep.
experiencing this with him. And I've never felt that before. I've never known what that feels like to feel safe and secure with somebody instead of like floating in a cloud off in outer space, excited, whimsical, which I have those feelings too, but the groundedness is just something that's so different.
Yeah.
And that comes from you feeling grounded and confident again in who you are.
And right. And that's, so I think that's a great point. Until you figure out who you are, until you're comfortable with who you are, you can't really have those relationships, because you're masking. I mean, I know I did. I was just masking stuff because I didn't have that confidence in myself. But now that I do, it's a whole different perspective.
Absolutely. And you need to ask yourself, why are you looking to be in a relationship? Why are
Yep.
you with your partner? Is it because of how they make you feel, or is it because of how you feel together building something?
Right.
Like, people should change their perspective on how somebody can fill their cup and change their perspective of how somebody is stealing from their cup, like constantly taking from them. And it should be an equivalent give and take, a give and
Right.
pull. It should feel like a dance. It should feel like this, like, gosh, I don't even know. It's just like gardening almost, It should feel like you're in a garden together, growing things
Yep.
together, pouring into each other, pouring into the things that you're building together. And if it doesn't feel like that, well, how did it start? What were you
Right.
looking for in the beginning? Were you looking for validation? Were you looking for attention? Were you looking to fill a void that hasn't been filled? Those are really important questions to ask for sure.
So let me ask one more question.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts off that way and it's all grounded and it's all good and there's support and there's trust and there's communication, but then over time it starts to wane and it's not as supportive and it isn't as communicative as it was. What do you do? How do you
Okay.
get it back on track?
How much time are we talking?
A year.
Okay. So let's think of a tree. Okay. And you've planted the tree and it's got great roots. It's been growing for a year. It's not that big. It's kind of flimsy at the bottom, right?
Yep.
And a big storm comes, right? And it
Yep.
blows it all over the place. And maybe it's not completely like broken, maybe it's not shattered, but it's kind of like leaning over. What are
Yeah.
you going to do? You're going to put like a staff or something in the ground, you're going to tie it up, and you're going to focus on making sure it's still growing. So I can't remember who is it? I'm trying to remember who I saw this from. That's always my hard part with my information. I have a ton of it, and sometimes it gets lost in the brain. ADHD, you gotta love it. But it talks about how partnerships that are healthy should have regular check-ins. You should be like meeting up, like not like business meetings, but just partnership meetings. You should be meeting up and seeing, are we still going towards the same goals?
Yep.
How are you feeling on, your happiness level? Are you taking care of yourself? Find out, like, where did things shift? What came into our reality that changed the circumstances for our growth? And you
Yep.
got to be able to be present with it. You got to be able to be conscious with it, because a lot of people get so caught up in life and caught up in the things that are going on, that instead of realizing the damage that's being caused in the relationship, we immediately change our perspective outside of ourselves and want to blame the other person for what they're not doing to show up. And
Right.
that's where we don't
Yes.
communicate our needs. We don't talk about what we're seeing. We don't talk about how we're feeling, and instead it becomes the like nag battle, right? Like the woman's always nagging and the man's always running. That's like not true all the time, but like that's the systematic like basis of how we think. The woman's
Yep.
nagging for him to show up more, and he starts avoiding because he feels nagged, and then it
Nagged.
becomes that like mother child relationship more than it is the
The
partnership. So
partnership.
it's all about your perspective and how you see your partner. If you don't see them as a partner a year in, well, then what are you doing?
What are you
Like,
doing? Yeah,
yeah, you
exactly.
really have to look at your relationship, and you have to know that the only way that it continues forward, like Mel Robbins says, I love Mel Robbins so much, but the way that Mel Robbins put it, for a young woman who was like, she was really successful, she was doing really great, and then all of a sudden she fell off the cliff and like started doing drugs and was like not
Yep.
not healthy anymore. So she came to Mel Robbins, and Mel Robbins was like, well, I want you to put a line down a page like this, put a line down the middle, and on this side, write all the things every day that you did when you were healthy and successful. And then write all the things every day that you're doing right now. Compare and adjust, adjust accordingly. So, it'd be good and healthy for a couple that might be going through a struggle right now, not feeling
Yep.
connected, to write a list down of all the things that they really loved about their partnership in the beginning that made them feel safe and secure, and write all the things that are happening right now that are not like helping them feel safe and secure, and then come together and talk about it openly, honestly, as you would with your best friend, as you
Yep.
would with somebody you love to pieces, right?
Right. Yep.
Because you want to be able to love them the same way, and you want to be able to adjust things if you can, and like be understanding and compassionate that maybe your life at this moment is not open to creating that, but you love and care about each other. You'd like to meet somewhere in the middle and be able to do it again. But that takes practice and a
Yeah.
lot of patience. So,
Eva,
yeah.
can you see the comments?
No, I don't see any.
Don't. Okay. So Susie with a Z is
Hi,
here.
Susie.
And she has a couple questions for you. So the first one is, Amber, what do you do after the tree's roots are already really deep?
What do you mean? Can you repeat it one more time?
Yeah. So she asked, what do you do after the tree's roots are already really deep?
Okay, so I'm assuming that the tree is unhealthy. I'm assuming that the tree doesn't feel good anymore. That's what I'm assuming that she means by that.
Yeah.
And just like if you're done with the tree, you got to excavate the roots. You got to excavate the roots. It's going to be a really painful healing journey in the sense of like, think about how roots work. Like, there's going to be pieces that break, there's going to be pieces that are stuck in the dirt. Like, it's just, it is what it is. And I think the acceptance part of that is really hard. Like, for instance, my parents were married for as long as you guys were married
Yep.
with your former. And my mom just left my dad last year, right before Christmas.
Mhm.
And I can't imagine that healing journey because they've been together since they were 17. It's
Oh,
going to be
wow.
long. It's going to be painful. They're never not going to think about each other. They've spent their
Right.
entire lives together. They're both 60 this year. Um, and that's big. Like that's a really big tree that you're excavating
Yeah.
essentially.
Right. Absolutely.
So you really have to be patient with yourself. You have to be graceful. You have to know that grief is such a like intense process. You're going to feel it. Sometimes it comes in waves. Sometimes it's small and you're going to have one tear. Sometimes it's huge and you're going to be out for a weekend bawling your eyes out
Yeah.
because it is sad
And
when
it's
you've
really all
loved
those
somebody
7
for so long.
stages of grief, right? I mean, you have to go through all of those there, and you have to come to terms with, you have to work through all the stages
Totally.
of grief, and it's really hard.
Well, and even after the stages, like you cannot help when it comes up. You can't help. You might be over it for 10 years, but that one thing that comes up just hits you like it just
Yep,
does. Like you
it
can't
does.
help it. Grief is such a like confusing situation and we all grieve about different things in different ways, right? Like it sucks, but I hope that answered your question, Susie.
Okay, and she has one more for you. It
Okay.
says, 10 years go by and we realize, oh boy, I've grown. And my partner is still the same, is still at the same place where we were when we met. What would you
Yeah,
suggest? We
that's
do open
hard.
up that uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah, they're again a uncomfortable conversation. So what's really hard, and I wrote this down too about ACA because I went to ACA for 6 months and it was really helpful. That's adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. And what it taught me is that all of us in some way are children because we are. And I grew up Christian, so like the whole idea of like the children of God, right? Like
Yep.
I don't necessarily vibe with that anymore, but thinking about people like children is really powerful because you never know what somebody's upbringing is. You
Right.
can tell when somebody is emotionally or mentally or physically or like whatever, how they show up. You can tell when they're immature. You can tell when
Hmm.
they don't know how to communicate their feelings. You can
Right.
tell when they're having an adult tantrum, right? So when you've been married for 10 years, and you're growing and the other person isn't, you have to have that conversation with them. You have to say, like, it's got to come into your own words, right? Like, you've got to feel it out with what you need to say. For me, I would say, I'm worried about you. You know,
Yep.
I love you. I care about you. This was our goal when we got married. We haven't reached it.
Right.
How can I support you? That's hard. That's so hard for people
That's
because
right.
again, they want their own needs met. How can I support you? Do you still want to move forward? What do you want to do with your life? It's been 10 years. Are you
Yeah.
happy with where you are? Ask questions, try to understand them. And if it's that they're not fulfilling you, they're not fulfilling you. I think it's so hard for people to accept that we can grow apart. And it happens all the time. It's why the divorce rate is so high, right?
Right.
Like we do grow apart. And it doesn't have to be a battle. It doesn't have to be a fight. It doesn't have to be ugly. It can
Right.
be as simple as accepting that people grow apart.
And
It
for
is.
me, the interesting thing was everyone was mad at me when I initiated the divorce.
Mhm.
And like 3 years later, she's a totally different person. Like
Exactly.
everything that was broken is fixed. Like she had no friends. Now she has friends. She had health issues. Now she like, and I actually said to her once, if you were like this now 5 years ago, we wouldn't be in the situation we were.
And it goes to support. Like we were
Yep.
talking about how you were not a good communicator. She didn't
Right.
have the support she needed, right? So now that
100%.
you cut the expectation of the person who I need support from, now I'm required to support myself. And she
Exactly.
did. She
Yep.
supported herself.
Yeah.
That's powerful. That's
It's
awesome.
really powerful. Yeah. No,
It is.
I commend her for everything that she's kind of turned around. I think, part of me is, I don't want to say if part of me is upset about it, and some part of me is upset because now I see what the potential she had, but she never brought out. And part of me is, so part of me is resentful. Like, why couldn't you be like that 10 years ago? But it
Right.
comes back to, well, why didn't I push her to be
Well, and
like that?
it's not about pushing our partner. I know that's what we think in our brains, but a big part of it is that you were not feeling fulfilled in yourself.
Right.
And because you weren't fulfilled, your expectation goes to your partner to fulfill you. And when they don't, they're the problem, right?
Right. Oh,
We don't look at
100%. Yep.
ourselves as the problem. We don't look at ourselves as the reason why things are not working out. We always look outside of ourselves because our parents would always do that too, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's
It
not me,
literally
it's
took me
you.
3 years. Yeah. It took me 3 years to figure that out. No, I completely get it.
So I was married for 2.5 years, and this was almost 10 years ago. And I love now where I'm at because I don't have any regrets. I don't have any resentments with him. I hope he's healthy. I hope he's doing great. And I fully take accountability. This is the last thing I want to say today. Take accountability for
Yep.
yourself. Take accountability for the things that you do negative against somebody, but also take accountability for the positive things that you bring in somebody else's life. I, for the longest time, could not see the toxicity that I had taken from my parents into
Yep.
my old marriage. I was terrible at communication. I was the nagger. I was the one frustrated. I was in the relationship where I was growing and my partner was not. And I could not figure out for the life of me why he didn't want to do it. Now I know, well, alcoholism, not in him, but in his family, played a huge part of that. Our needing to live up to the expectations of our parents played a huge part in both of our roles being toxic because neither of us were feeling like we were confident or validated in the decisions we were making. And we were both very immature. So as soon as we had a conflict, we were pointing fingers at each other. We were fighting. We were
Fighting.
battling.
Yep.
We were screaming in each other's faces. The last fight we had was the worst one. And it was from, 10 o'clock at night till 8 o'clock in the morning. It was awful. And like, that was it for me. That
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
fight. I was so done. I was
Done.
exhausted. I was like, I never want to do this again with you because
Yep.
this is not how hard it should be.
Right.
And now I'm like, God, if I had just said things differently, if I had asked him questions instead of like coming at him with an attack,
Yeah.
because that's how my parents were. They would attack each other all the time about things. Like
Yep.
it just was the natural language in my home. But if I had asked him questions like a supportive partner, I probably would have the partnership I started with, which I'm grateful for because the partnership I have now, I mean, he's my best friend
Yeah.
and I want to be his best friend. And that's where my focus is. And I have that full example before me of what not to do.
What not to do. Yep.
Right. I know that if I'm hungry, I better eat some food before I open my
Yeah.
mouth.
Yeah.
Like I need to take care of me before I come to you because if I'm not taken care of, I might be more moody or angry or I might just come off the wrong way. And I
Right.
don't want that. I want to
Right.
be received well. I want him to always know that when I show up, I'm here to love him. I'm here to be his partner. I'm here to support him. And when I pour that out to him, he pours it right back out
Right
into me.
back. Yep.
It's that flow of the love language, right?
That's awesome.
So yeah,
That's
definitely.
awesome.
Do we have
Well,
any other
thank you.
comments?
I think that was really it from Susie. She had a few other things, but I think we covered the important
Okay.
things. So I just
Cool.
want to thank you for being here today. This is
Absolutely.
amazing.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, Warren.
We'll definitely do it again. Take care.
Cool. You too.
Thanks. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.